been that's about a year or so
Yeah, I
since
think so.
since that. So hey, I gotta have my at least my once a year, Nate Skelly episodes. So here they
And
are.
people have been waiting all year. They're like, when is the Nate Skelly episode coming out? Like,
Yeah, they are on the edge of their seats, no doubt. Inflation, as well as the stock market kind of not being so hot right now, I think those are two relevant concerns. And I've listened to your episodes that you've kind of addressed both of those in recent episodes. But so I think you have a good perspective on it. So maybe that's a good place for us to start.
yeah, I mean, wow, there's a lot we could talk about on inflation. I think one thing that I think it's important for people to keep in mind, like with inflation, it's not steady across the board. Like this just recently, I think it was last month, the year to year, like the 12-month inflation rate was 7.5%. So I mean, if you buried $1,000 in the backyard last year, you can buy about 7.5% less than you could have last year. I mean, that's really, so I mean, for your money that's sitting in your checking account, your bank account, just there, it is kind of depressing when you think about like I'm losing purchasing power every month. But it's not in every category. It's not like everything is 7.5% more expensive. And the areas that have gotten way more expensive is mainly in transportation. So like gas, we all know gas is way up. Cars, like used cars are really expensive. We're probably going to be selling our SUV here pretty soon and buying a new SUV. And so it's like, on one hand, I'm looking at these prices for SUVs and I'm like, oh man, but at the same time, it probably does mean I can sell our used SUV for a little bit more. But so I think it probably works out in the end for us. But then other things, they're less than 7.5%. So it just depends on where you're at. Like we saw lumber spike there last year that went up really high and then came back down, and I think it spiked again. So, but it's a ripple effect, right? So if gas is more expensive, what does that mean? Well, for all the trucking companies, their costs have just gone up. For Uber, for everything that relies on gasoline for their business, if their costs go up, they pass it on to the consumer. And so you kind of see that go in waves. And so part of the question is, all right, so what's causing the inflation? So we had huge spending bills these last couple of years.
Yes.
Starting with COVID, and there's been like several waves. So by the way, how did you get all your stimulus payments? Did they all come in for you?
Yeah. So, I'm gonna be honest with you. At some point, I just got a little bit confused. Like, there's just money getting dumped
track
in my account, and I'm like, what's going on here? But yeah, I got the first. Because how many were there? Kind of initial, just like one times. Like there were 2 or 3 of them.
I can't even. The last one was a lot. The last one my family got 7,000. So I'm trying to remember.
And you've got 3 kids, so that's
So I got the 3 kids, but I think we all got equal amounts, 1,400 apiece. It seems like forever ago. It wasn't even that long ago.
Yeah.
That was the last wave. I mean, in one sense, it's like, all right, cool, but when that money has to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
And so we've really expanded the money supply. Like incredibly high. Like the money supply is just it's insane. It's when we start talking trillions, it's like nobody really knows what that means.
Yeah, I mean,
you know what I'm saying?
It's hard enough for me to wrap my mind around the concept of a billion. A billion being 1,000 millions, and then a trillion being 1,000 billions. That's wild. I got that right. I mean, see, that's the thing. Like, I can't even start to quantify it there. But yeah, I mean, it is crazy. And then also, I was getting this child tax credit as well. I started. That was like a monthly thing. Like that was just again getting and the way I see it, I'm like, I'm like you. I'm like, okay, thanks for the money, but where's this coming from? And I'm gonna turn on to pay for this eventually,
Right.
and so
So, I mean, what happens is, so, I mean, every year there's a child tax credit and it's refundable. So if you end up the year and you don't actually owe taxes, but you still have a child or children that, you know,
mhm,
qualify you for a child tax credit, you still get that money. So a lot of people every year, they don't pay any taxes. In fact, they actually get paid from the government, like several
mhm.
$1,000s because of these refundable tax credits, the child tax credit, earned income tax credit. So, I mean, a lot of times people are like, I got a refund of $5,000. Well, I know it's technically called a refund, but it wasn't really a refund because you never, I mean, in almost all of those cases, people didn't actually pay $5,000 worth of taxes during the year. They may have paid some, but it's a return of their taxes that they prepaid, yes, but also just the government. It's kind of like, it's almost like a stimulus that's built into the system.
Mm.
So the idea was, because of COVID, they're like, how do we help people? I know, here's what we'll do. We'll bump up the tax credit for kids. So everybody that's got children, we'll give them a bigger tax credit. It used to be 1,000. Then under Trump, it went up to 2,000 with their new tax bill back in 2017. And then for last year, it was 3,000. Or if your kid is 5 or younger, it's 3,600. But if that wasn't confusing enough, they're like, here's what else we'll do. We'll send half of it to you early. So like if you have one child that's under 5, you're gonna get 3,600. But we want to get that money in your hands early so you don't have to wait until you file your taxes. So what we'll do is we'll take 1,800 and we'll divide it up into 6-month payments, and we'll send you a payment every month from July to December. So $150 a month goes to your bank account for you having a kid, you know. And so like for us, I think it was 850. I got that math wrong. It's not 150. But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no,
Um,
I get it, and I am literally, I was today years old when I learned that that's what happened, because I literally, like, old Joe sent me a letter in the mail. I thought, well, thanks, Mr. President,
it
sir,
was a personal
nice,
letter.
yeah,
He really did send that to you.
thank you for thinking about
That's why
me.
he always looks so tired.
Yeah,
He's writing letters
it's a lot of letters to
constantly.
write, and so I got that, and it was trying to explain that, but first of all, if you're gonna contact me by way of actual like snail mail, like you're lucky I even opened it, because a lot of times it just goes straight in the trash. But so I'm just like, okay, whatever. What is this? And then yeah, this money just starts. I saw something, child tax credit, blah blah blah, and then I just start to see these payments jump, getting dropped in my bank account, and I'm like, okay, what's this all about? And yeah, now I know why it happened. So
Yeah.
thank you, Financial Pathway, for your contribution to me understanding why the government was just dumping money in my account. So, uh,
Yeah. Well, so I mean, so there's all of that. So there's the child tax credits, right? There's the stimulus payments. There's these spending bills where they're, trillions of dollars. So we don't have the money. So what we do is the US government collects tax money every year, but they spend more than they bring in.
mm,
So the way they meet the difference is they create government bonds, which are basically IOUs. And there's plenty of people that buy government bonds. Foreign countries buy them. Our own government buys them, which is kind of a weird concept to think about. Like we buy our own IOUs, but we do. Institutional investors, big corporations, it's just, a lot of people buy US treasury bills or notes or bonds. And that's how we fund our difference. But we can't keep doing that forever. Like it's just common sense that if you're making $60,000 a year and you're spending 90,000, like that's not going to work
mhm.
long term. You got to correct that at some point. So that's a big part of it. Just the money supply has been expanding. And then another part of it is just everything got ground to a halt with COVID. Like all of the supply chains and everything just got factories shut down. Everything was just kind of on hold. And then, of course, navigating through COVID, then it's like, all right, now we're opening back up, but people are opening up back up at different speeds in different ways, different places. So it was like this whole like log jam
Mhm.
started, to where it was like, we still need stuff, but the time has now been backed up. The one big one that caused a lot of problems was the chips
Yep. Yep.
for
Just,
cars. These new cars, they need these chips. So like, cars are literally, they're off the assembly line, they're ready to go. They just need this one piece
yeah.
that they can't get, and it's backed up. Like, I just heard recently that in the housing market in some places, they're churning out these houses, to meet the demand in the US. But one of the big things that's backing people up is garage doors. For whatever reason, garage doors are backed up. So, people are trying to get garage doors in their house, and they're waiting a month. The house is ready to go. They just need a garage door on the front. So, you got that as well. So one possible explanation was it's just supply and demand. It's just the backlog. Things are taking longer. There's less supply. We're trying to ramp up to meet to meet the demand coming out of COVID. So it's just kind of wonky, and it'll sort itself out. So as people talking about like transitory inflation, like it's just but I think more and more people are coming around to the idea that it's not transitory. It's mainly because of the fact that we have more dollars in our system, and it makes sense, right? If you
Yeah.
put more dollars into the system, then they're not worth as much. So therefore, prices have to go up because your dollar's worth, only 90% of what it was just a couple of years ago. And so, I mean, I think that makes sense to most people. So the question is, well, what do we do about that? Well, the Federal Reserve, that's where they really come in, and they have different tools they use to try to get things back in line. And probably the biggest thing that they do is they change interest rates. So the idea is, right now, interest rates are really low. Like,
Mhm.
you've got a mortgage, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I got a mortgage. Most people that have a mortgage were very well aware of the fact that interest rates are low, because it's like you can get a mortgage for 3% and sometimes less. Like, it's crazy. I mean,
Mhm.
that was unthinkable. Like, for my parents, they were like so happy to get like 8-9% interest on their mortgage, like,
Yeah.
so so in that sense, it's good. We're like, great. It's very easy to borrow money. Interest rates are very low. And what that does is it actually encourages borrowing, and it encourages economic activity. It's easier for people to go and get a business loan, to take out a mortgage. They can afford a house now. People that maybe before it was a little bit out of their price range, now they can afford it, or they can afford something bigger or better. So all that spurs economic activity. The problem is, the more borrowing and lending that's going on, the more the money supply is increasing, and that pie is getting bigger and bigger. And now the Federal Reserve thinks, it's too big. So how do we kind of start shrinking that?
Mhm.
And so one of the ways is to increase interest rates. So, and the idea is, it's like, I talked about this in a recent episode on my podcast. It's like the Federal Reserve is kind of the chef in the kitchen cooking the steak. They got to get the flame just right. Can't get it too hot, that should burn the thing. Can't get it too low, or else you're undercook it. So they're kind of tweaking around with interest rates, because if they just raise interest rates up to 10%, well, then nobody's going to be borrowing. All the economic activity is going to shrivel up, and then that's not going to be good either. So it's
Mhm.
like, how much can the market bear? How much can people deal with, and we still keep this thing moving? So I think what we're going to see, and all indications point to the fact that interest rates are going to start creeping back up later this year and continue to do so, but that's always subject to change. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's the plan. And again, what that's going to do is you're going to start to see, mortgage rates are going to go up, and car loans and everything, everything that has an interest rate attached to it start going back up. And hopefully, at least from the Federal Reserve standpoint, that shrinks the money supply, will help to ease the burden of inflation and make sure that it doesn't start running away on us.
Yeah.
Um, so that's in a nutshell kind of what we're seeing. And you never know. I mean, it changes, almost on a daily basis. But when people talk about inflation, and that's where it's coming from. Those are some of the different schools of thoughts on why it's happening, and what we can do about it.
Yeah. Well, with interest rates in mind, I have to insert obligatory housing lender financing ad right here. Take advantage of the or know your rates, which I wish I had. Wish I had those ads, but no. So,
Yeah, I was
anyways,
gonna say I would be very impressed if you had like Rocket Mortgage or something
yeah,
that was sponsoring your podcast.
yeah. Well, no, they're not. But I guess
Shout
we
out to
just gave
Rocket
them.
Mortgage.
Yeah. I guess we just gave him some free advertisement, but yeah. But all that does help to understand, why this is happening. You mentioned, and now I will throw this in there, and you referred to the chip shortage. What role? And we don't have to dive into this super deep, but what role does the supply chain issues play in this as well?
Yeah, I mean they do play to a certain degree, and I think it's pretty obvious that's a big reason why like cars and used cars they're
Hmm.
up in price. I mean it's mainly due to that. But I don't think we can just put all of just point the finger and be like that's all it is. It's just backlog, because we have just an unprecedented level of spending. Our national debt is just surpassed 30 trillion, which by the way, I mean, on one hand, it's like that's really concerning, but everything needs to have a context. When you just throw out the
Hmm.
number 30 trillion, I mean, I don't even fully know what that means. Like
Yeah.
like we just talked about, like that number is so astronomical, it's hard to wrap our heads around. But what we have to do is we have to basically try to compare that apples to apples. Like what 30 trillion doesn't mean anything unless you know how much we're bringing in a year. So I believe we
Hmm.
bring in about 4 trillion a year in revenue through taxes. So, you can try to it gives you somewhat of a gauge for like, okay, if we're pulling in 4 trillion, even if we could take every single dollar and just take it all towards paying down our national debt, it would take 7.5 years.
Yeah.
You know, but the problem is we don't even have enough money each year to meet the stuff that we've budgeted between Social Security and Medicare and our defense spending. And just you go all the way down the line, every budget item, we're still spending more. So, and the funny thing to me is politicians, it's such a it's such a funny brag to me. Politicians who are like, we reduced the deficit. And that sounds really fiscally responsible. It sounds
Yeah.
like, wow, this person's really good with money. What that means is we spent more than we had last year, but this year we still spent more than we had, but not as much as last year. So last year we overspent by 1 trillion. This year we overspent by 900 billion. Boom, fiscal responsibility right here. I'm the adult in the room. It's like
Yeah.
it's so funny to me how politicians use that jargon to make it sound so good, and it's like it's it's not good at all.
Yeah, no, it's not. And again, I don't want to go off on this too much, but we can't help but think like, what is that even something that like paying off the full $30 trillion deficit? Is that even something attainable? And how does that even happen if it is?
Yeah, I mean, I guess technically it could happen, but it would take a long, long time
Yeah.
to turn that ship. Um, and really, in a sense, is a national debt like? There's some people that are like, national debt doesn't matter. Like, there's some people out there that are like, there's no big deal. We can
Yeah.
run it up to 50 trillion. What they're not concerned by it. Um, so I mean, those are people who are way smarter than me, and they know a whole lot more about it than I do. Um, but yeah, like to me, is like, do we have to get it down to zero? No, but we can't continue at this pace. That's what's more concerning to me. It's just
Hmm.
kind of the whole like, let's just kick the can down the road, just keep spending, keep swiping the credit card, that sort of mentality. I mean, back in the 90s, we had several years where we had a surplus. Like literally, the government brought in more taxes than it spent. So we had extra money. Like that seems so foreign to us today
Yeah.
that could even happen, but it did. And it was just, 25 years ago. So, problem is the game of politics is it's all about I care more.
Hmm.
And so it's very difficult. It's very unpopular for a politician to say, hey, I'm tightening the belt here. I'm cutting spending.
Yeah.
I'm because no matter where you cut it, somebody's going to be mad. Some
Yep.
group's going to be up in arms. So it's way easier to sort of pander and say, "Hey, we care, so we're spending more in this area." And it's one of the big weaknesses of
Yeah.
democracy and representative government.
Yeah.
But
It's true. Well, again, I didn't want to dive down that rabbit hole too far, but yeah, I think what and this is what I genuinely wonder, and is just having reassurance that my life, in terms of how I behave and what I do in terms of my finances, aren't. Yes, inflation. We all have to deal with it. We have to deal with these things, but by and large, my life and what I do is not drastically affected by the government's, lack of fiscal responsibility.
yeah, I mean, yes and no. I mean, we're all paying more than we were a year ago,
Yeah.
and part of that is, who's calling the shots. So it does have an effect. Does it? But I think to me, what's healthy in your finances is spending your time focusing on what you can control.
Mm.
It's really unhealthy spending most of your time up in arms about things that you have no control over. It's just not a good way to live your life. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not saying you shouldn't be involved and vote and be informed, because you absolutely should. But should you be, kind of wringing your hands and just, shouting at the sky all the time because of stuff that you don't have a say in? No. And if you'll make smart decisions, if you'll make wise financial decisions, I mean, you'll be able to be just fine regardless of those things that are going on.
Yeah.
And kind of speaking of inflation and just poor management and economic collapse, I just saw earlier this week. So in Russia, we all know what's going on with Russia and Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Their economy is tanking big time. The ruble is their currency, and it dropped 30% in a matter of just like a few days.
Wow.
So I mean, think about that. Think about a 30% drop in the value of your currency, that within in the matter of just a couple weeks, because your leader decided to invade another country, now your money can buy 30% less
Mm-hmm.
than it could have a couple weeks ago. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, the Russian stock market dropped about the same. It dropped about 33% in one day, because of all the sanctions that are in place. So they're putting sanctions on Russia. A lot of Western countries refusing to do business with them. They you haven't heard of SWIFT, have you?
A little bit. Yeah. This is something to do with banking and wire transfers, right?
Yeah, it's the system that was set up to kind of facilitate transactions.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently, at least from what I saw, they were going to kick Russia out, which is a huge blow,
Mm-hmm.
because Russia has this big war chest of like 600 and something $billion to like of reserves. The
Mm-hmm.
problem is, though, if no one else will transact with you, what good is it?
Yeah.
Like, you got this money sitting ready to go, but if you can't use the international banking system to do, to transfer that money, to do anything with it, then it's worthless to you.
Yeah.
And actually, this is an interesting kind of experiment, if you will, about with cryptocurrency, because a lot of people are like, oh, what Russia's going to do is they're going to just use cryptocurrency. Problem with that is that everything on cryptocurrency is traceable through blockchain. So it's like, you remember those folders that were like interdepartment mail folders, to where it's like a manila folder, and then there would be lines, and it would be
Yeah.
like, you write who it's from and then who it's going to, and then
Mm-hmm.
the next person would cross it out, and then they'd write the next one, so you could just reuse that folder, and then
Yeah.
it just goes back and forth between the same organization. Like, that's kind of what blockchain does.
Hmm.
Like it's a ledger. So you don't necessarily know the identity, like the actual, like, physical identity of the person, but the account, the wallet, wherever it's coming from, is traceable to that regard. So if there's huge amounts of money that moves through the blockchain, and move through cryptocurrency, people will see it.
Yeah.
So they'll know what's up.
Hmm.
So it'd be really hard to move $630 billion, or however much they're going to want to move through those means, because it's pretty obvious who
Yeah.
that's who that is at
Yeah,
that point.
exactly.
Um, so it's so they're kind of stuck.
Yeah.
It's really kind of amazing how just it's evolved with our modern financial system,
Yeah.
that we could basically, because like back in the day, what would you do? Like you'd set up an embargo. You'd like put ships outside like the port, right?
Yeah.
Nobody can come in and out of this port. Well, like that's not really feasible these days, or not in this case. It's not feasible, but it's like a digital embargo.
Hmm.
It's like it's kind of the same thing, but it's happening all on the internet, all online, and
Yeah.
it's kind of amazing to see in real time.
Yeah, it is. Well, and I'd heard somebody commenting the other day, some pundit about, how this more or less, it's not to say that avoiding outright war and conflict. It's not saying that's completely unavoidable, but it is amazing what we're able to do to essentially put efforts forth to end a war, to end an invasion without really having to technically go to war. At least, send in troops and all of that stuff. That really, like you said, the possibilities, even honestly, 20, 30 years ago weren't even there.
Yeah.
So it is an interesting dynamic that it brings nowadays.
Yeah. Yeah. And so between the combination of inflation and now Russia and Ukraine, and where is that going to go? It does get people really worried, and I get that. I mean, it's concerning to me. I'm not going to lie, but
Hmm.
at the same time, I think this is again one of those. Every year, it seems like there's a new test to our conviction. We talk about, yeah, you have to invest for the long term, and you have to, not try to time the market, and so we all say that, and it's easy to say in a vacuum, as far as like, if nothing else is going on, it's like, yes, invest for the long term. Don't try to time the market, and don't. But then when stuff like this happens, you're like, oh, do I do I need to be doing something like really drastic here? Because
Yeah.
what if another country supplies weapons to Ukraine, and then Russia decides to act, aggressively act towards them, or and we use this, are we going into World War III? And it was a really great blog. I've really enjoyed his articles. It's called Of Dollars and Data, or Data, I guess, however you want to say that. Um, guy's name is Nick, and I don't even know how to pronounce his last name, because it's an Italian name and it's got a lot of vowels, but it's really good. He's done a series of blog posts here recently about just that. Like, hey, what happens in times like this, when there's international conflicts, when there's war? How does it all shake out? And I
Hmm.
mean, every single time you realize, okay, you got to play the long game. You can't get too caught up in what's going on here and say, I think I need to move money out of stocks. I need to move it over here and wait for this dip. And because you don't know. In fact, even like during World War One, like 1941, Pearl Harbor, all
Hmm.
that, like you would think, like Hitler is invading Europe, and like the entire world is embroiled in this, existential conflict. You would think the market would be like way down,
Hmm.
but I believe, if memory serves me well from looking at the chart from the market, was up that year. And
Hmm.
we certainly had some dips at times, but you said, like, how does that happen? Like, in fact, actually, what was interesting is the day of, like, the first market trading day after the invasion, market opened way down. Like it was like down 2 or 3%, just to begin with, because people are like, here we go.
Yeah.
That's how
Yeah.
this is not going to be good. by the end of the day, it would have traded positive. It just turned around in a few short trading hours. And since then, it's popped up and down several times. So it's just interesting. It's interesting to see how people react, how the market reacts. And we have to keep in mind, too, is the market it's forward looking. So like the market is not telling you what it thinks things are worth now. It's telling you what it thinks its worth is going forward. It's all forward looking. And so yeah, it's just been interesting. And again, I mean, for everybody that's concerned, it's like, I hear you, I share your concerns, but at the same time, this is not the time to be making radically different decisions and saying this time it's different, because it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get different set of circumstances, but the overarching principles remain the same. So
yeah. Well, around this time 2 years ago, when COVID was really starting, and I mean the markets tanked bad, and people were freaking out and selling off, and I mean not 3 months later, by the time we hit to the summer, I mean the market was booming. And so that is something that you hear from guys like you and financial guys of like, hey, you need to play the long game. And like you said, it's easier said than done, and sometimes it's easy when the market is and everything seems to be on the up. You're like, oh yeah, play the long game. But then when it's like, oh no, I have money and it's losing value and whatever. Okay, yeah. Well, then you start to freak out a little bit. So, so a lot of what we are discussing today, you cover, and I'm just going to make a plug for it right now, in your monthly newsletter, Money Minute. And so I was going to be sure to make a plug for that, because that's where like the Russian ruble and a couple other things we're going to talk about here today. Yeah. So, if somebody out there was interested, kind of pause here for a little ad break for Financial Pathway, if you will. How would somebody get connected and get this newsletter?
Yeah, go to my Facebook page, Financial Pathway. You'll find it on Facebook, and I've got a link there. Or you can just go to my website, nateskelly.com, and there's like a little pop-up that'll come up after like 15 seconds, and you can sign up for the updates. So I really enjoy it, because each month, basically what I do is I just say, what are like 4 of the most interesting articles that I've seen this month? And I'll share them there. I'll share some popular posts, some different graphics, things that have caught people's attention. And then I'll usually throw up, one of my podcast episodes for the week. So really what I try to do is it's kind of like a highlight reel of the month for finances, just things that I think are interesting or that you should be aware about. And it's a little bit of everything. Like this month, let me pull it up here. So yeah, we talked an article on the Russian ruble, the Mormon Church. This is I was shocked to find this out. I only found out about this a few weeks ago.
Yeah, this
the
is
Mormon
pretty interesting.
Church has this huge fund, like investment fund. It's over $100 billion. They started it back in the 1970s, and I don't know all of the kind of the hierarchical system of the Mormon Church, but they tithe, and so I think all the churches that are part of the Mormon Church, all of the individual congregations, they send money to Salt Lake City, to the main headquarters, and part of that money gets put into the hedge fund. So obviously you've got millions of Mormons worldwide. They're paying tithes. Part of that money is getting funneled to the main head organization, and they're setting some of it aside.
Yeah.
So it started with like $1 billion back in the 1970s, which, back then that was still a lot of money, but of course it's grown over time. And with these last couple of years in the market being as good as they are, it's grown even more. So to put that in perspective, like Harvard, their endowment fund is $41 billion, and they have the largest.
Wow.
So it's Harvard, Yale, and MIT. You combine all their endowment funds, it's still not as much.
It's
as the Mormon Church has.
That's $100 billion, and they're a religious nonprofit organization. I mean, that is wild.
Yeah, I don't know, so tax wise, they should be able to, as long as they use the funds for the purposes of their ministry and not for like business purposes, it should be not taxable. And I know that that would rub some people the wrong way. They're like, that's not fair. That's, but, well, that's a whole nother thing, I guess. Um, I don't think it should be taxed. I mean, I don't obviously agree with the Mormon church and their beliefs, but I think it's important to have religious protections in place for those needs. But like to just to use like normal distribution rates, like people talk about the 4% withdrawal rule. Basically, the idea is, okay, if you want to start taking money from your portfolio at a safe rate to where the money can still grow and you're not going to spend it all down. Sometimes people are just like, just do 4%. Now, I have a little bit of a different system, and I think it allows for more withdrawals. And anyway, but that's a whole nother thing. But just to use the 4% withdrawal rate, just as a rule. So that means the Mormon church could theoretically take out $4 billion a year for their funding purposes and not risk spending down that money. It could still grow over the long term. And I definitely don't think they're taking out $4 billion a year.
No.
So I think that thing's just going to keep growing. The question is, what are they going to even use that for? I mean, I guess it's a good problem to have for them.
Yeah,
$100 billion.
Much better than than our government. Like I said, they got the opposite problem.
Right.
But
maybe that's what they'll do. They'll help the U.S. government pay down.
I'm sure
0.02% of their debt.
Yeah, that'd be a great use of their funds. But the government would gladly figure out a way to get their hands on this, I'm sure.
That's very true. That's very true.
But I mean, hey, when you're the Mormon church, I believe, when you hear the word tithe in Christian circles, that's, we think 10%. If I understand Mormon doctrine, their required giving is somewhere in the neighborhood of 20%, I think. If I've heard that before. I don't know. I don't, Google me, see if I'm right. But I'd heard that before that. And supposedly, again, if there's some Mormon out there, somebody that's LDS, and they're like, no, you got it all wrong. Okay, fine, tell me. But I believe if you leave the church and you stop giving and you want to come back, there is a there is a back tithe, like literally. Like, I don't know if it's the full amount or what, but maybe that's not true. I'm not. That's just a little tidbit that I heard a while back, and so. But anyways. If that is true, though, it's like, okay, it makes sense how you could accumulate, because the Mormon church has always been known for, like, even outside of this figure, they've always been known of being like, hey, you're not struggling for money. Like, you got your gold towers and all this stuff that you're building. Clearly there's some funds there. So,
my friend Dennis Fountain, who's out in Washington State, he's like in the middle of the state. When I was out there, he was telling me they're building this huge new temple nearby them. I think it might be in his town, in Moses Lake, but there's a huge Mormon population kind of up in that Northwest, not necessarily like Seattle, but like Washington, Idaho, Oregon, like kind of the more rural parts of the state. And so it would be kind of centrally located for a lot of them. And it's crazy. So obviously they got the money. So maybe that money's coming from that big investment fund. I don't know.
Yeah. But $100 billion. When I saw that, I was like, that is crazy.
Well, and here's the other thing too. Like, so here's what was so crazy to me. I saw that, I was like, oh wow, that's crazy. But then as I go and I talk to churches about stewardship and giving, we talk about practical finance. And one thing that I always try to bring up is, like, in your personal planning, it's great to plan for retirement, have a bucket list, things you want to do, places you want to go. That's great. But like, why are we so hesitant to tell people to consider the church in their legacy giving or their goals? It's like, your whatever college you graduate from, they're going to say, hey, donate to the college. That's why Harvard has so much money. There's plenty of charitable organizations in your community, whether it's like, for the Pet Society or for Habitat for Humanity or like what have you. And they're all like, hey, we're doing good work here. Give us your money so we can keep doing good work. And people are like, yeah, great. I'll give you my money because I believe in what you're doing. And then the church, we're like, Um, yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
if you want to, maybe, I mean, that would be nice. I don't know pressure.
we'll take it.
And I get, like, we don't, there's like, and there's part of me that's just very aware of the whole like prosperity gospel and financial shysters, and just like, we don't want to be that. We don't want people to even entertain the possibility that we could be that. So I get that there's hesitation around that. But man, like, if you're a member of your church and you're involved, what other organization in your community do you think is more important than your church? Like, that's
Exactly.
great. If you're involved with like a Habitat for Humanity or Pet Society or something like that, great. That's fine. Go ahead and do that. But like, your church should be the most important organization. So besides passing on an inheritance to your family, I think that should probably be number two in your consideration. And man, I mean, like, I've been able to be on the side of those conversations where people want to give very generously to churches, and it's a really fun thing. I mean, that's a
Hmm.
great conversation to have, and that's a really cool thing to be able to do. But I think a lot of pastors, they feel hesitant, they don't want to even bring it up, and I get that. I get that hesitation. But for me, I'm kind of like, man, folks, like, if the Mormon Church has $100 billion, if Harvard has $41 billion, like, where are the Christians at? Like,
Yeah.
where's that sense of like generosity for our churches? I mean, I think that's an awesome goal, and it's a really, maybe rewarding is probably not the best word for it, but but in a sense, very rewarding to be able to do something like that. It's
Yeah.
much better to give than it is to receive. So
Of
anyway, that's
course.
just
Yeah. No, no, that's good. And I mean, because yeah, you mentioned it. There tends to be these different kind of extremes. There's the, like you said, the prosperity folks that, they say, hey, if you give, you'll be, you'll be blessed and whatever, and all this crazy wild theology
sow a
that's
seed.
completely, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then there's another approach that, that I think, the again, if what I heard about the Mormon church and what their required giving is, the Christians can be, they can kind of lean into that approach a little too much too. Like, well, you have to, so you have to give 10%. This is something that you're required to do. And if you don't, God's not going to like you. And we were, actually in a conference recently where somebody had a very, remember that it was Kerry Schmidt. He had that illustration about, how God and his angels are sitting up there just like tracking tithing and whatever. I thought that was pretty good. Um,
Yeah,
and
I
so
can't recreate it. It
no,
takes
no.
about 5 minutes to do it right too.
Yeah, yeah. So, but anyways, but so we've got that, so people taking that approach, and so then I can understand why those maybe, pastors and church leaders, that they say they don't necessarily want to fall in either one of those camps, and so they take the approach of just being incredibly hesitant about even bringing up giving, and whatever. And so I do like, and I'm glad you said that, because that is something else that you do is, help churches, pastors, and then just people in the church understand, I think, a good, proper biblical perspective of giving and finances. And so that's something. Again, another nice little ad break there for a financial pathway. So, there were some other things here. Something I am going to skip ahead here in the, again, we may not get to every item here that you put in your latest newsletter, but I just had to talk about this
Yeah.
because I'm a nerd like this. The new Lord of the Rings series is gonna cost
Yes.
is cost over $1 billion to produce a series. Now this is crazy because I keep up with this world. Now I say that, and I actually have never seen any Lord of the Rings movies. I've actually not seen any of them. I
Really?
haven't. Yeah, which people are shocked to hear that because I'm a movie guy. I like, Star Wars. I get into the Marvel stuff, but this is the one kind of cinematic universe I've not partaken in yet. So I can't speak to. So I'm not coming to this as a Lord of the Rings nerd, if you will, because I've not even seen
Yeah.
it. But if I remember right, the rights alone costed $250 million. So there's a quarter of your budget. That's wild.
Yeah.
Um, but if I remember right, the Avengers, the last two Avengers movies, Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, those were both shot at the same time. So they were all shot and produced at the same time. They were released like a year apart. But that to produce both of those movies, and these are huge movies. I mean, big actors,
Yeah,
big
right.
action, all this
A-list
stuff.
celebrity, yeah.
Was just shy of $1 billion. But that's to produce two movies, what wound up being two movies with a runtime altogether of 5 hours. And again, all these big name actors, all the special effects, and all so I don't know. When I saw this $1 billion to produce a series, not a movie, a series that's going to be streamed on the internet. To me, this is a big thing to nerd out on just what this means for the entertainment and techie media world. Is that shows a huge shift in where we are in terms of how we're consuming entertainment. Like Amazon, yes, they can definitely afford this, but they are willing to put $1 billion behind their streaming platform. I think that really is just a nail in the coffin, if you will, of some of the old ways, if you will, of entertainment. I don't think movie theaters are dead and whatnot, but I mean, $1 billion for streaming series, that is crazy. So that's definitely the one that interests me the most in terms of your stuff you have in this newsletter.
Well, I'm glad I caught your attention with that. I'm still trying to get over the fact that you've not seen the Lord of the Rings. Like you got to see them now.
Well, here's the thing: they're a massive time commitment because they're so long.
Yeah, they are.
That's been my biggest hesitation. I have no doubt. Like I know Peter Jackson is he's a great filmmaker, and the Lord of the Rings stories are really intriguing. Like it interests me, the concept of it. But just every time I even think of this idea of like, you know what, I'm like, oh yeah, these are really long. These are really, really long movies. And so that's why I haven't done it yet. So, but I don't know. A bit.
I feel like if you like, I love the Marvel movies. Star Wars is okay. Like I'm not like a huge like Star Wars. Like Star Wars, but
Star Wars has been better. I will say that. So
say that again.
Star Wars has definitely been better. Like I don't like the recent movies, the past two movies.
Oh, okay.
I
gotcha.
Anyways, I'm not going to go off on that, but yeah.
You got to watch the Lord of the Rings. The Hobbit series is not as good as the original Lord of the Rings. So if you're going to watch both, start with the Hobbit, and also chronologically it comes before it. But so I grew up. I watched the movies first, then read the books. But I even read the books, so I went to that like level of like. And the books are really good.
You are Lord of the Rings. You're a nerd. Like I'm gonna just go out on a limb and call you that. There, yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I need to get my brother Josh on here because he's the one who could tell you even more. He was all into it, and I really enjoyed it too. So there's a big part of me that's like very excited. Like I'm really looking forward to this. Mm-hmm. Now there's been a couple small like little glimpses into it, but not really anything. There was a Super Bowl commercial.
I saw the trailer. Yeah.
But it didn't really tell you anything about the series. There's been a couple articles, some like exclusive articles that share a little bit about it, but again, doesn't really tell you anything. So I mean, to me, I'm more in that camp of like, this better be good. Like, I really like reading the books, knowing J.R. Tolkien's like his genius, the level of like he literally, I don't know if you know this, Luke, but like. He created that world, Middle Earth. Like he created languages.
Yeah.
Straight up created languages. Just made them up from scratch that are in, and he wrote histories and appendices.
Yeah. Those things.
Like all of this, like this huge volume of work. And I have not gone to the deep dive. So you say like nerd, like people who are real Lord of the Rings nerds, they're like, yeah, you read the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit. That's cute. I've read the Silmarillion. Like, like they're all the way down that rabbit hole. But so like for me, I feel like that legacy and just the epic world that Tolkien has created, I really hope that the series does it justice. And I think I guess it's a good sign that they're like all in on this and like they want to spend this money. Now, obviously, where they're going with this is they've seen the success that like a Game of Thrones type of series has. And they're like, oh, a fantasy world. People love that. And so obviously I hope that like the Lord of the Rings is going to keep it true to what the Lord of the Rings series is, and not have all the objectionable things that would have been
Yeah,
in
I was gonna
Game of
say if they go
Thrones.
the
And
Game of Thrones route, that'd be a very different Lord of the Rings.
yeah, I
Than
think
what
you'd
they
have a
can.
lot of Lord of the Rings fans that would be very displeased with
Yeah,
that. And it doesn't really seem like that's where it's going. But you just hope that anytime somebody takes on a project like this, they don't try to use it they don't try to like piggyback onto the work of somebody else and try to use it to say what they want to say. That they try to stay true to the themes and world that Tolkien had created, and tell a story in that style. So we'll see.
yeah.
But I'll tell you this: I will be watching it. So
Yeah, well, and I see it comes out in September, so that gives me a few months to if I want to. Well, and actually, I heard this. I heard that this chronologically, because yeah, I know enough about it to know The Hobbit comes before The Lord of the Rings and whatever,
yeah,
like the actual in terms of the movies. But I had heard that chronologically, this actually comes before The Hobbit.
yes, yeah,
So
exactly.
I guess technically, chronologically, I could just start here and then because to
I
me
guess.
that's a bite-sized way to do it, because I'm like, okay, each episode will be maybe an hour long. That seems a lot more manageable to
Yeah.
me to do it.
Although I think to appreciate probably what's going to go on in the series, it kind of necessitates that you have an understanding of the
Probably.
background of the series. But yeah, you're
Yeah.
right.
Well,
I'm sure it's
but
fine.
yeah, getting back to that figure, I mean, even again, 250 million spent on just the rights. That's
Yeah,
that's
that was
wild.
Tolkien's family. Apparently, they needed to sell the rights to pay taxes that the estate owed. So that was a big reason why they were
Wow.
motivated to even sell the rights. And um, and the fact that they went for 250 billion, I remember seeing that a couple of years ago and being like, and people were like, "That's insane! Like that's like nobody pays that much for rights to a movie unless it's
Unless Lord
Lord
of
of
the
the
Rings.
Rings."
Yeah. So that means 750 million is what has actually gone into the production. And that's
And I think
still,
it's going to be way more than that. Like
oh
I
yeah.
think from what I've read, they're like it's easily going to eclipse a billion, and it could be going well past
Well,
that.
especially if they obviously this is there's no way they're calculating for anything beyond the first season. I mean, if they're going to go into multiple seasons, then yes, we're gonna. So that because I will say I am liking the advent of more series content. Marvel has started doing series now on Disney Plus, and I don't know if you've seen any of them.
Yeah,
Some are better than others, but like
yeah,
Loki was really good. I loved Loki.
yep,
And then, and then all of them have been enjoyable.
yeah,
And so, like, I can honestly say, with the exception of Spider-Man: No Way Home, the series of 2021 were just destroyed the movies because I hated Eternals was garbage and Shang-Chi was meh and Black Widow was pointless and Spider-Man was pretty great. But the series
yeah,
though, they were good.
yeah,
I enjoyed it. So all that said, I mean, this is a big shift. And I mean I do think it's true that we theaters they're coming back online, if you will. But I do think moving forward, your theatrical experience is going to be reserved for those big blockbuster movies.
yeah,
Which again, I am glad I saw Spider-Man, the latest Spider-Man movie in a theater. That was a really
yeah,
cool experience in the
yep.
theater. But do I care about watching Marry Me, the latest chick flick in a theater? Well, absolutely
Okay.
not. I'm not even going to
Well, you're
stream that.
obviously way up to date on the chick flicks because I haven't heard of that one. But
Well, I was actually just talking. That's actually going to be the second time that I mentioned that in an episode, because I was just recording another episode with somebody who brought it up. So, anyways, so that's the thing, is that's the type of movies that are going to, dominate theaters. And then, again, Marvel has kind of figured out the secret sauce of saying, hey, we create this, which, I mean, they're not the first to do it, but I think they're the first to do it in this way of, we create this universe that exists, or I guess now it's a multiverse. And, all these movies connect, and
Mhm.
then they also connect in with the series. And so, it's brilliant. I mean, just from a
Oh
storytelling
yeah,
perspective, I very much like it. But anyways, all that to say, this Lord of the Rings, I guess now that we say all that, we talk about that, Yeah, the fact that it would cost $1 billion, I guess I'm not all that shocked. It's just the sticker shock of seeing, oh, $1 billion. Actually, somebody's going to do it. They're going to spend that much on a series. That's wild, but that's where we're headed.
Yeah, I think and I think it'll definitely pay off for them. They're definitely trying to compete with Netflix and Disney Plus. Um, Amazon Prime's not really known as the go-to spot. Like they've had, I guess, some original things that have worked for them, but they're not. It's more like people get Amazon Prime for the packages,
Yeah,
for
for the 2-day shipping,
delivery, and they're like, "Oh, cool! I can watch some shows and movies too." Like that's
So
to me, that's how I look at it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I do watch stuff on Prime from time to time, but you're right. This is the first big, kind of like content they've put out that I feel is really going to drive people to go to Amazon Prime for the purpose of getting their streaming content. But I will say this, you brought up Netflix. I'm not super impressed with Netflix much anymore. Like Netflix to me, like I was off it for like a year, and then I got back on it because there was a show I heard that actually is good and I wanted to watch. And so anyways, I got on and I watched it, and then I was like, well, what else did I got? And I was like, oh, this isn't that impressive. So I canceled it again. I watched my show and paid a month and canceled again. But anyways, that's just me. I'm a Netflix hater, people, because when it comes to all the, I think Netflix takes this quantity over quality approach. Like, hey, we're just gonna put stuff out there, and then it winds up being like, there are some good shows, and movies, but most of them are meh. I mean, that's it. They're just meh.
Right.
And so, anyways, I hope that this Lord of the Rings thing winds up being a quality type of production. I'd imagine that it will be.
Yeah. Well, like, I mean, I've got 3 little kids, so like Disney Plus is kind of where we're living.
Yeah.
But I mean, even Disney Plus, I was kind of surprised. Like they've got a lot of stuff too, because we've got the kids profile and the parents profile. So there's still a lot of things that, even my wife and I like to watch in movies and even some shows and stuff on there. And then of course they've kind of consolidated, like they brought in Nat Geo and, they have Marvel stuff, they have Star Wars stuff. So, there's a lot that Disney Plus.
Well, now they've got the old 21st Century Fox, which is now 21st Century Studios. That stuff, like all the Ice Age movies are on there. Of course, all the Pixar movies. So actually Disney Plus, that's probably the one I use more than, because I have a daughter, and so she loves watching all of the kiddish stuff. But again, the Marvel stuff is there, all the Marvel series, Star Wars. I like I do like the Star Wars series. I've liked The Mandalorian, and Book of Boba Fett was pretty good. So their series have been good. I just didn't care for Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker. They disappointed me in a big way in those. But again, I digress.
Not that you're bitter. Have you looked at have you talked about on the podcast before kind of the Netflix story, kind of how they've evolved over time?
Well, no, I haven't actually talked about that. You talking about how they've, from like the DVD model to the streaming model?
It's super interesting. Like, because back in the day, Netflix, their whole business model is we mail you DVDs, we mail you the movies you want, you send them back. And so Netflix was just kind of like scraping the bottom of the barrel, like going to all these studios and being like, hey, what do you got for us? All these movies you're not using, we'll pay you on them. And studios are like, cool, great. Yeah. Why wouldn't we do that? You're going to pay us money to rent out these movies that, so it was like, it made sense. And then Netflix made the jump to streaming, which early on people were like, people were very hesitant. They were very much like, I don't really.
There was a time where the only way you could stream was through like a desktop computer. And so, I can understand that. And internet speeds were kind of slow,
so it's like, why would I sit here and be in my office on my desktop watching a movie when I would watch a movie on my TV?
Because I remember the early days of Netflix, and like, I remember like trying to stream stuff, and it was like the quality wasn't that good because of the internet speed and whatever. So I do remember when they made that shift, everybody was kind of like, what? But
Well, the two things that just really that like to me are just like so interesting that they did is then they moved to streaming and then it started to catch on. And then of course they're still doing the same thing. They're going to these studios, be like, hey, give us the rights, give us the rights to The Office, give us the rights to this show, give us. And studios are like, yeah, cool, great, because these are a lot of times shows that were off the air, movies that had premiered 10, 15, 20 years ago. So they're like, this is great. We can still make money off of our content by just renting it out to Netflix. And then Netflix started to build in popularity and they started really making money and growing their subscriber base. And then all of a sudden, both sides, the light bulb hit. The studios realized, wait, why are we giving our stuff away to Netflix when we could just do what they're doing and get all the money and not just part of the money? And the light bulb went on for Netflix. They're like, yeah, why don't they do that? So we have all these deals that we set up to like license their content for 3 years, 5 years, whatever the case was. When that runs out, they're taking it back. They're not going to renew with us because they're going to go start their own thing. So the clock is ticking for us. What are we going to have left on our platform in 5 years when everybody takes their stuff away from us? We've got to create our own content. So that's where you start to see the Netflix originals come in. And so and now it's like everything on Netflix is like Netflix original. And I think it's purposeful too. Number one, they are doing a lot of content and they have, they now do a lot of movies with really big name stars. And it's, a lot of their movies are just as good as movies that come out in theater. Yeah. But they want people to engage with mostly their content too, because that's what keeps them. If people are just watching stuff from another studio on Netflix, they're not really loyal to Netflix. They're loyal to whatever that, other.
Well, and I've even noticed, that I remember the first ever Netflix original production, I believe, was the series House of Cards. I'm pretty sure that was the first. Okay. Because I remember them making this big deal about it, and they let you watch the first episode or 2 episodes, whether or not you were a subscriber. And if I remember right, that was the first one. And I think Netflix was the first streaming platform, at least significant streaming platform, to release rather and create some original content exclusively for their platform. And so that was back in 2012-ish, something around there. Because I remember that was around the time I had originally gotten kind of aware of Netflix. So 10 years ago. And in 10 years, we've seen that massive shift to, I think last year Netflix released one original series or movie every single week. And so,
crazy.
Which, it's crazy.
It's like a factory then. They're just churning it out.
They are. They're just like, in fact, I think it was like an SNL sketch I saw a while back where there was a joke about like these guys. It was like the Netflix executives sitting, there, and somebody walks in and they were like, I have an idea for a show. And they were just like, yes, money. They're just like, take our money. So again, that's why I'm kind of hard on Netflix. I'm like, you've definitely gone with quantity over quality, but the Netflix brand power, when you see that little dum dum right there at the beginning of, oh, this is a Netflix show, it has so much brand power that people are going to watch it, and I'm just not drinking the Kool-Aid because again, I'm ultra picky. Like I'm very, very hypercritical of movies and shows and whatever, just because that's the way I am with stuff like that. But clearly I'm in the minority because Netflix is still, I believe, the dominant streaming service out there. the others like Disney and so forth, Disney Plus have grown.
They're growing. Disney's catching up. When you look at subscription or subscriber numbers, revenue numbers, Netflix is still far and away. But here's something crazy. Okay, so 2 things. Now we're going down this rabbit trail, and I'm really loving this.
Now, this is the rabbit. This is the rabbit I will gladly chase. Yeah.
YouTube ads in the 4th quarter of 2021 made more revenue than Netflix did in the same time period. Is that not insane?
That is wild. That's
YouTube ads.
Yep. it's insane. Again, it's the sticker shock. But then when you take a step back and you think about it, you're like, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense because I mean, YouTube, that's a whole other, I mean, YouTube has their own premium offering and they've produced some of their own like original studio produced content. But by and large, YouTube, I mean, obviously it's just
Right.
users. I mean, it's
Yeah,
just
think about that. Right. How much did YouTube spend on original content versus how much Netflix spent on original content? And they still beat them
yeah.
in revenue.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, there's something to be said about that model because, again, they are sharing a piece of that pie with some of the creators.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I will say, like, I put all of my stuff on YouTube. I ain't never seen a dime from YouTube, and I probably won't. I mean, if I do, it'll be a very long time.
Mr. Beast.
I know, right?
That's your problem.
That's true. But yeah, so it is the streaming world in general is it's kind of circling back to what we were talking about earlier with just this advent of digital and what we're able to do nowadays with whether it's money, you know, or in this case entertainment, like it has changed everything. And
Yes.
And you know, I remember the days of cable, which do you still have cable of any kind?
No, YouTube
Yeah.
TV. Yep.
Oh, you have YouTube TV. Okay, I was gonna say
Well, I mean, like cable, and that's like streaming. I don't
yeah,
have,
yeah,
like,
but I
a-
meant like actually paying, you know, for cable and flipping channels. Yeah, I remember the days when I was probably in middle school, high school. My parents, you know, we had just they were cheap, and so we just had the basic cable package, so we couldn't get you know ESPN and you know some of the other cooler channels. And they were like, yeah, well, and I remember my dad and my mom and us talking about it. Yeah, I really wish we could just pay for the channels we wanted and whatever. And I'm like, well, now you kind of can.
My
Like,
parents
that's
did the
how.
same thing.
Yeah, but now you kind of can because it's like, well, if you want Disney content, go pay for Disney. If you want Netflix content, go pay for that. If you want NBC Universal, go to Peacock. And then Paramount Plus is actually really good. I've actually gotten into that one a little bit more. Yeah, I like Paramount Plus because they your local like CBS affiliate, you can stream live. And so what was nice is like during football season, I was able to, you know, watch, you know, NFL. Now I'm able to like March Madness is coming up and I'll be able to watch it there. And so and then of course there's Paw Patrol. And so that's a big winner amongst my daughter there. And so, but they've got some decent content on there as well. But anyways, yeah,
You know what
it is
is going
cool.
to happen with all those, right?
What's that?
So we had cable, where it was like, yo, here's a bundle of channels, take it or leave it.
Yeah,
We're like, we don't like this. We want to pick our own stuff. I picked Netflix. And now there's gonna be so many streaming services. You know what's gonna happen?
Yep.
Somebody's gonna bundle them all together and sell them for one price.
Yep. Hearing about like in the next decade, we're gonna hear people. Yeah, they're gonna be like, man, you know, us spoiled millennials and Gen Z or whatever. We're gonna be. I hate that I have to log in here and here. I just want one big place. And yeah, somebody's gonna reinvent cable for streaming.
Just put it in one place. Charge me $75 a month, and then I have all my stuff.
Yep. Yeah, because I heard somebody complaining the other day they were complaining about all these streaming services nowadays. And it's like, this is what we asked for, people. We wanted this for years and now we have it, you know? Yeah, well, all that getting back to what we were originally talking about, which was the new Lord of the Rings series. But I enjoy talking about all that. You mentioned The Office earlier, and this, I don't think this is, and it's not, I'm not seeing it in the newsletter. I think I saw it on a post. You posted the cost, like the value of each episode of The Office. It was like $300,000 or something crazy like that. $500,000.
Like the rights, I think for The Office, it was something like 25 million for 5 years.
Yeah, back when it was on Netflix.
Then when you do the math, or maybe 25 million, whatever the math is, however much it is per year, you break it down by number of episodes. It was like $500,000 per episode. So because it's just one of those things that like, it's really valuable to have on your streaming service, because that's the type of stuff a lot of people like to watch. Short, quick, or 22-minute episodes.
Yep.
And people can just sit down and turn it on, or just A lot of times people don't even watch stuff. They just put it on and they're kind of like half watching while they're playing on their phone or doing something else. But you know what? Netflix. So the last thing about Netflix, what they did just that was really interesting to me, and how they just turned into this monster, is then they've clued in, and all the streaming services do this now. They clued into, oh, every time somebody's getting on our site, they're giving us something really valuable, and that is their information and their viewing habits. So they created that algorithm to be like, okay, when people get on Netflix, what kind of shows do they watch? And when they watch this show, what other shows do they want to watch? And when they watch this movie, what other movies do they like? And then what they can do is they could put all the threads and figure out, okay, people that like war movies, they really like war movies with this actor, with this type of script, with this type of setting. So let's go make one.
Yeah, exactly.
Teenagers from 13 to 17, like this type of rom, and they really resonate with these characters, and so we'll make one. And it's like it's like we're telling them what we want, and then they're going out and making it for us. And that was kind of, and it's a little bit scary when you think about it, but it's also really ingenious on their part to where they're telling us what they want. So we can just keep giving them what they want, and it just becomes this self-perpetuating thing. It's crazy.
No, that's where I've also, I heard this a while back, that the biggest industry out there is not entertainment. It's not movies. It's not whatever fill in the blank. It's the industry of metrics and data. Like, that is the biggest, because if you can collect the data and then you can know what to do with it, that is priceless. I mean, that in any
Facebook, Google.
Yep. So, in fact, I think that's one of the most sought after positions are people that know how to do all that stuff. Yeah. So, it is very interesting. But the rise of Netflix is an interesting story, and the fact that think about it. I mean, if you're in charge of Netflix, like, which, by the way, their DVD service still exists. It's called DVD.com. It's still there. They still really own it. Yeah, it's still there. If you go to DVD.com, you can.
Have you seen that picture? It's so cringy. It's this billboard from Blockbuster from it's like I don't know what year it was, probably early 2000s. And it's this guy with a phone, and he's like, Netflix has an algorithm. We have a callgorithm. Where it was like literally what they were advertising is you can call somebody at Blockbuster and you've got a real person to like suggest movies for you. I was like, what? Like, that did not age well at all.
What I was going to say, like, where is that? Like, that would never be appealing to me. Like, oh, I can either sit here and I can just pop open Netflix and like let the computer tell me what to watch, or I can get on the phone and call someone. Heck no, I don't want to get on the phone. So
call a complete stranger and be like, tell me what to watch.
Have you ever seen did you ever watch Seinfeld?
No, never seen it.
Oh man. Okay. Yeah. There's this episode where, the number, cause that used to be the thing, like, back in the, before the internet, like, you would call these automated movie services to tell you what's playing and what's showing. And the phone number, I guess, is like one digit off of Kramer. And so instead of like hanging up, he tries to pretend to be that automated service. So he's like, for this movie, press 1. And like, he can't decipher. It's just like, oh, why don't you just tell me what movie you want to watch? Anyways, it's worth a watch. It's on Netflix nowadays. Seinfeld is. But yeah, so I forget where Netflix, just seeing it, the rise of it, and seeing how, again, if you're the guys who made Netflix, you were the ones who led that industry, and like Disney is now playing catch up to you, and Paramount, these big studios, they're playing catch up to you, and so I mean there truly are. I think when we look back at history, if you will, of the digital revolution, whatever you want to call it, like they have to be mentioned, even if Netflix, even if they do get eventually, maybe eventually they do become nothing, because these other studios do take them over. But if nothing else, they were the ones who started the streaming revolution and made it is what it is today.
Yeah, it is interesting to kind of follow the history of companies and how oftentimes what leads to that meteoric rise is just doing something totally out of the box, something different, something really that at the time seems risky, but they have a
Hmm.
high conviction in. And then the problem is once you become this monstrosity, then these layers build, and it's really hard. Then it's not as maneuverable. It's not as
Yeah.
agile. You add
Yeah.
in all this middle management, all this bureaucracy, these systems, these and people, the original founders who just sort of said, we're unleashed in our thinking, we're going to be totally out of the box, we're going to do whatever we. Now it's like, no, no, no. More and more of your people are not those out of the box creative types. They're more of the follow the system, follow the
Hmm.
regiment, stay inside these neat lines. And that's good. You need that kind of person, you need that kind of mentality in some areas, but that's not what's going to get you to that next level. And so that
Yeah.
that next level creativity that you need to have a disruptive technology, to have a breakthrough. So that's why it's interesting, because the more Netflix succeeds, the more they become a victim of their success, and the
Yeah.
harder it becomes for them to go to the next thing. And that's why the next startup, who's lean and agile and hungry, they can kind of
Yep.
do the next thing that sort of propels them ahead. So, I mean,
And
it's,
that
you look at like a Sears or a J.C. Penney. That's what happens. They used to be the
yeah.
place, but they got stuck in their ways, couldn't adapt, and that here comes Amazon, and you're done.
And they're done. Yeah.
So,
And I mean, that is what is exciting. One of the many things that's exciting about capitalism, and just that is because, I mean, yeah, in I'm sure right now there's some startup out there that they started in a garage or whatever, and in 10 years we're going to be talking about them. They're going to be
yeah,
trading, at the top of the market, and they're going to
yeah,
be an up
yeah.
and
Who
coming.
is it?
Exactly. And what is it going to be
Yeah.
about? What are they going to change? And everybody always says like, "Oh, that could be you." And I'm like, I'd like to think of myself as a creative person, but I'm like, I don't know. Like, come up with a creative idea right now. I don't know, so anyway, so all that to say, it is streaming and just how it has changed, just entertainment and the way that we consume content is very like I said, there's some parts of it that is kind of scary, but overall, I
Sure.
mean, I love the innovation of it, and I love where we're at, and it is hard to think like what is next. How could it get any better? I mean, but I'm sure, and I know it can. Like there will be some idea, something someday that we're remember the days when we used to like have to stream that content and it was only
Now I
2D.
just close my eyes and I just play the movie on my eyelids.
Well, I was gonna say that the metaverse is probably the next iteration of it,
Oh
which
yeah.
that's a whole other thing, and I'm not. I'm
Yeah,
actually,
maybe next time we talk, we can go real sci-fi, sort of like just crazy. Go metaverse, and then we can talk Neuralink.
yeah.
Two things that I really don't know anything about, but it would be fun to freak out about.
It would be fun to speculate. That's for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
I always say when it comes to the metaverse, I'm going to be left behind there because I cannot wear a VR headset because it makes me nauseous.
Mm.
I've tried. Like my brother has one connected to his PS4, and
Yeah.
it makes me sick. Like I can't wear it for longer than maybe 30 seconds, and I get dizzy and whatnot. So I'll just
So
be
here's
well.
Yeah, well, here's the question. I just kind of dawned on me. Will VR headsets in the metaverse be to us what smartphones were to our parents? To where it's
I
like we'll eventually get there to where we're like, okay, I kind of know how to use this, but I still don't. It's not really like I'm still kind of like, you know,
yeah. Well,
it's like a
that's
healthy level of skepticism about it.
Well, yeah, I really I do think so because I mean I think that because even again 15 years ago, like the concept of a smartphone and like, oh hey, you're gonna carry this little screen around in your pocket everywhere you go, and you're going to find yourself looking at it all the time, we'd be like, no, we would not only be like weird, we'd be disturbed. We'd be like, oh no, that sounds completely unhealthy. No way. There's no way I'm going to do that. And well, now we all are. And so taking that, screen from being in your hand to over your eyes is not that far of a jump. I mean, it's really not. And so
I never thought of it that way. It's all your desk.
Yeah, I know. I'd heard a joke a while back about like somebody said, hey, you want to know the difference between an iPhone and an iPad? And they were like, iPhone? iPad. Because when you pull it a little closer, now it's a little bit bigger. And so
why did I buy an iPad?
Yeah, I know, right? And so anyways, yeah, I do. I think that the metaverse is going to, I think it's going to be interesting to see. And that is scary because I genuinely am skeptical about, the negative effects that could have, I mean, yeah, there will be people, I don't think it'll be everybody, but I think there will be people, cause there's already people doing this without the metaverse, but I think there'll be people that will wake up, they'll put on a headset, they'll literally live in the metaverse for all their waking hours, and they'll take it off and go to bed. Because right now, hey, people are getting up and I'm on my computer all day, so I guess I don't know. I think that's the world that many people will live in.
Yeah, we're already very reliant and kind of codependent on technology for the most part. Many of us. So it's just kind of taking that to the next level. And then Neuralink even more so.
I was saying, yeah, Neuralink is that. I'm all about Elon Musk, but that one scares me right there. I mean, that's real. That's freaky stuff.
Well, maybe that'll be next time. I got to read up on it first.
Yeah, I was gonna say I gotta figure out what it's all about. Well, again, I think I love what we've covered today, and I know we chased a rabbit there with the streaming stuff, but again, I actually thought that was really helpful. I enjoyed that. Make sure for anybody watching, listening, that you do head over to nateskelly.com, get subscribed to the Money Minute. It's just one email a month, right? Yep. And
highlights for the month.
Yep. And anyway, so get signed up there. There were a few articles that were interesting. One here about laundering, the laundering one we didn't get to talk about, and then
that's a crazy one.
Yeah. I skipped over that one to talk about the Lord of the Rings one, but maybe I shouldn't have. But and then just a bunch of stuff, and then of course your podcast. You always link to some episodes of your podcast in it as well. And Financial Pathway. That's where we connect with you on Facebook or on podcast, or nateskelly.com. So, well, Nate, I really enjoyed chatting with you as always. It's always a good time.
Yep.
And we'll do it again sometime.
Awesome. Thanks.